Hello, biology students. Today we are going to talk about biomolecules and how they are important to the human body. To get started, we have to do a little bit of fact finding about what makes up biomolecules. If you look at all the different biomolecules from carbohydrates, lipids, proteins to nucleic acids, you will find they all share one thing in common. They all contain carbon. Now, what makes carbon unique? Today we're going to describe some of the functions of each of the four macromolecules. As we go through the many different macromolecules, look at what role carbon plays in the makeup of those macromolecules. To get started, we can see one unique feature about carbon is that it can form several chemical formulas, not just methane, isooctane, but could also make carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Whether it's in the form of a chain, or in the form of a ring, or in the form of branching chains, carbon has the unique ability to form compounds with many different elements that are free in nature. Looking at this diagram here, you can see this is a macromolecule. It is a large organic molecule found in living organisms. Now, the macromolecules that I was talking about earlier, the lipids, carbohydrates, and proteins, all come in the same format. They are usually made up of a chain of chemical compounds that are linked together to make those products. Whenever you link parts together, we call that polymerization. It's basically taking smaller parts, these subunits right here, piecing them together to make a bigger part, which we see right here. We have two different unique names for those. The first name is monomer, that's the single units here, and polymer, that's the chain that you will develop after you put those monomers together. An example of this would be carbohydrates. The monomer, the single unit, would be glucose. And again, notice the role that you can see that carbon plays in making one single glucose molecule. Several glucose molecules together form a longer chemical product called starches. What makes carbohydrates a unique carbon biomolecule that all organisms need is that carbohydrates help the body maintain levels of energy. They help you sleep better, they prevent diseases, they help you control your weight, they keep your memory sharp. They're best for athletes. So if you're a runner, footballer, a football player, a basketball player, you'll many times have a spaghetti dinner the night before a game, just because it gives you a burst of energy on the playing field the next day. Lipids, a little bit different from carbohydrates, um, are much more complex. If you look over here to the right side of my screen, you can see just how complex they are as opposed to carbohydrates. And if you look at how complex they are, not nearly as complex as a as a lipid. Lipids are large, and they are a varied group of macromolecules that are not generally soluble in water. Many times when you put a lipid, such as oil or butter, in water, it usually floats to the top. There are two parts that make up a lipid. They are glycerol and fatty acids. You can see here in the diagram, the glycerol is the top part, and the tails that you see dragging down below, the branch chains of carbon with hydrogen bonds, make up the fatty acids. This is called an unsaturated lipid. Unsaturated means that it's not does not have all of the hydrogen to make it a complete molecule. And you can see some missing hydrogen links here. And because of that, it makes this lipid at room temperature a liquid. Lipids are important because their structure is made up of fats, oils, and waxes, provides a great source of energy for cell structures as well as insulation. Many times you'll see people eat a lot more during the colder season so they can gain weight to insulate their body against the extreme temperature changes. Lipids also make up cell membranes. They give cell membranes their flexibility. And if you remember from eighth grade, cell membranes are also important to cells because they regulate what goes into the cell as well as they protect the cell from damage from any outside sources. Another carbon biomolecule is called nucleic acids. Nucleic acids, like DNA and RNA, are made of smaller molecules or monomers called nucleotides. Nucleotides contain three parts, a nitrogenous base, phosphate group, and a five-carbon sugar. What makes nucleic acids important? Nucleic acids make up your RNA and your DNA. And if you remember, DNA contains all the genetic information that makes you, you, from your eye color to your hair color, and not just what's on the outside of your body, but what's on the inside, what type of blood type you are, what type of cell regulation occurs, what cell differentiation takes place. So DNA carries all the instructions for making your body function. The next carbon macromolecule is called proteins. Proteins are polymers made of smaller units called amino acids. Here we have an amino acid monomer. Several of those amino acid monomers will come together. You can see one here called alanine will chemically bond with another called serine. Together they will form a dipeptide bond. And that just means that there are one peptide bond holding the two together. In this particular case, several more amino acids will be joined along to this chain to form a bigger structure called a protein when that process is finished. Proteins are important because they are essential to the body. They help in digestion. Everything in your stomach to your small intestines contain enzymes called protease, lipase, and amylase. Now let's think about where they got their name from. Protease is an enzyme made of proteins whose prime function is to digest proteins, whereas lipase is an enzyme made of proteins that's prime function is to digest lipids. And now amylase is important for helping to break down carbohydrates. Other things that proteins are involved in, they help make your antibodies. They help regulate gene expression. They provide support to your body, as well as muscle contraction and hormone development. Proteins can be broken further down into sources of energy when there's no carbohydrates and no lipids available. Your body can then take things that are made of proteins and digest them and break them into fats, glucose, and a necessary source of energy. So, what helps your body to break the food down when you eat the food that you take in? Your body has to begin the process of digestion. We know all of these as chemical reactions, they involve enzymes. The total process is called metabolism. So, chemical reactions change one set of chemicals, in this case, lipids, proteins, and carbohydrates, into sources of energy and free compounds to be used for making structures in the human body. Here we have a chemical reaction taking place. The amount of carbon dioxide that's building up in your blood will attach to the water molecules in your blood to form a compound called a carbonate. That carbonic acid will be carried to your lungs, where you will exhale the carbon dioxide from your lungs back out into the environment. So this is what keeps or helps maintain the levels of carbon dioxide in your body. Without this process, you would suffocate and die. Now, this process is extremely slow by itself. So there are some enzymes that help lower the activation energy and help speed up the chemical reaction in your cell. So if you look at this diagram, this is a reaction pathway without enzymes. It's going to take a lot more energy, and of course the reaction is going to take a lot longer. Whereas when an enzyme is involved, the process quickly takes place, requires less energy, and the reaction occurs much quicker. Enzymes in the body, such as carbonic anhydrase, speed up this reaction by a factor of 10. So going back to our example of carbon dioxide building up in your body, um, we want that process to happen relatively faster than it would normally occur if it was just to attach itself to a water molecule. Enters an enzyme called carbonic anhydrase, and his job is simply to speed up the reaction time that it takes for the carbon dioxide to form a chemical bond with the water molecule. And here you can see the enzyme. The enzyme is the green structure, and it's going to take the water and carbon dioxide and immediately put it together and convert it into products of carbonic acid. Eventually, that carbonic acid will travel to your lungs, where the same enzyme, carbonic anhydrase, will work quickly to break it back apart so that the carbon dioxide could be released back into the environment, but the water will stay in your blood. Now, enzymes are important because they are substrate specific, and what that means is they are complementary to only specific substances. For instance, if it is a protease, that means it will only fit with proteins. If it is a lipase, it will only fit with a lipid. So when we look at it, here's the substrate. Imagine, if you will, this substrate being a protein. Enter the enzyme, which would be a protease, and it's protease, which is going to break the protein down into several amino acids. So we call this a lock and key system. And the reason why we do that is because the active site of enzymes and substrates have to be complementary, sort of like how a key will only open specific locks. The same process is similar to how an enzyme will only work with specific substrates. In this particular case, the enzyme protease will only work specifically with proteins. Well, that's all I have for you. I hope this lesson was very informative, and many of you were able to get the information that you needed to help you fill out your student handout for the presentation. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to your teachers and send them emails or arrange for a Google Meet later in the week. Have a great day.